figure I'll give a bit of a backstory first before we start. It'd be a bit confusing that there was a vet surgery logo. My wife and I own a vet surgery, and I was broadacre agronomist in my early days, and then got into the pasture side of things. And I sat back and looked, and I know the two most frequent phone numbers in any beef producer's phone book is the nutritionist and the stock agent. Ironically, they're the two that probably end up costing the most money. An agent, you perceive that you're getting money out of him, but at the same time, he is also clipping the ticket. Yet, the two most perceived expensive people to the average producer is A, the agronomist, because every time he comes out, he's bloody expensive because I've got to do something, and then there's the vet, because they are also expensive. Ironically, they are the two people that can turn the dial in your production system. So we've got a bit of a mantra in our business that we want us two sitting at the kitchen table each year with a producer to work out their plans. Because ultimately, if we can have a plan, we can actually get some sustainability and some financial stability. And a lot of the reason why I do what I do is because I want to see people mentally resilient, and the only way we have mental resilience is if we're financially profitable. If we look at it, the biggest issues are that we're always under pressure when it comes to finances. So I'll focus my talk today on focus on what you can control rather than what you can't. And in the 25 years that I've been giving advice, I sat back and reflected when I was coming up with this and realised that if I divided my clients down the line and we looked at it and said, same environment, same conditions, same advice, the ones that had the success were the guys that had the mindset to make it work versus the ones that didn't make it work, even though they had the same advice, was because they weren't clear on how they were going to make those decisions. So, and it was all about that focus. So that's what I'm going to talk about is, changing our line of focus, and because what we focus on is what we get. And if we look at it, the things that matter are over one side, the things that we can control are over the other. Like, if we look at the things that we can control, we can only control what happens within our boundary fence. We can't control the market. We can't control what Nick Meary is going to pay us at Borthwick's. We can't control what we're going to get paid at the yards. We can't control what the weather's doing. We can't control what's happening in the US or Ukraine or anywhere like that. All we can control is what is happening on our own property. So, when we look at that, we need to have a bit of laser focus of where we sit. And so as a result, I just want to there'll be a bit of information here, but my intention is that if you walk away with more questions than you come with today, I've succeeded, because the only time we change is when we have to reflect and be vulnerable. So, and now the most common one that I get for most producers is, when they ask what they do, I'm just a grazier. Well, what's just a grazier? That language in itself is bad enough. To me, when we're a grazier, we're better than that. We manage sunlight, we manage rainfall, turn that into grass, we sequester carbon, and we also turn off the highest quality protein known to mankind. And also, while we're doing that, we're managing a landscape so that way then we can look after the adjacent reef. And I've got a bit of a passion. There's two things that I love in life, and it's a steak and a bit of seafood. So, if I can get people looking after the land better, I can get to enjoy the two most enjoyable things in my life. But the big key is that we can't control the sunlight, we can't control the rainfall, but we can control our pasture. How we control our pasture is how we ends up controlling the carbon flow, and then we can also control the cattle. So if we can control those bottom fellas, that top stuff we can optimise and we can actually make something out of it. Now, I guess we look at it, Mackay has this really wonderful thing. We have a wet season, we have a dry season, we have something in between. And I'm going to peel it right back to basics in first point, and we go, in a cow and calf operation, when should I actually calve? Challenge this because we're seeing our seasons are changing, our wet seasons get later, and here we have the biggest problem of it all, is that we have, actually I'm going to ask this question of people first. You look at that chart, which is our worst 3 months of the year? Can I get a hand of anyone who thinks about where the worst 3 months of the year are for them as a producer? The first three. I reckon you might have heard this one before. And it is true that the first three are the worst 3 months of the year for us. And that's because it's so bloody wet. Our grasses are growing at a rapid rate of knots. We cannot keep enough mouths on them to do so. The paddocks get bogged up. And ironically, what happens is how we manage those 3 months will determine what happens at the other 3 months at the other end of the season. So, but if I was to look at it as a traditionalist, would I be right in saying that most people would aim to have their calves hitting the ground somewhere between probably this month and the end of October? If we're looking at this curve, you know, and then looking at that if I've got to get a calf back on the ground in 12 months, that I've got to put my bulls out in December. And I'm going to be doing all my animal herd management stuff around castrating and dehorning in that wet season. If we're looking at it from a feed management point of view, that would work quite well because January, February, March is when we have the most number of mouths on our property when we look at a cow and calf unit. You know, breeder with calf, 2.5 AEs, so we're up there, so we could manage that. But when we've got those kind of seasonal conditions, you know, we got great risk of bulls, you know, coming down with 3-day because of the conditions. We're working in excessive heat and we're dealing with a lot of fibre, so then our body heat in those animals is higher too. So then that's going to impact on our reproduction efficiency. When we've got those wet conditions, we get a greater chance of things like lepto. So then that then impacts on our rebreed as well. So we have all these factors that 3 month period there is probably our greatest problem that we could have. But it's the one that makes the most common sense. And I was looking at this because I myself, I am the CEO to my daughter's Brahman stud, and for a 15-year-old girl, she's the most cash-savvy person that I've ever known. She will sell a cow even if she's paid ridiculous money for it because it didn't give her a calf in 12 months. And it has to calve in the same month every 12 months, otherwise it's no good. And so we had to sit down and go, well, how can we manage our calving interval to maximise our returns, but also ensure that 42 days post-calving that we've got the most feed ahead of us so we can get the best weaner weights, so we can get that cow back in calf, because we've got to get it in calf ideally. First cycle, we want to have nearly 60% of the cows going in calf. The next cycle, we want the last 20 to 30. Anything after that, we start slipping out of the line of getting a calf on the ground in a 12-month period. So we actually flipped our system on our heads. And for us out at home, you know, second week in February is traditionally our wettest week of the year. So as a result, we actually now calve down at December. Christmas Day is the target date. It's hot, but we have shade, so we manage that. And it's about then managing, and then the bull goes out in February. But then I have a problem with that because we, just like you guys, because we're only a couple 100K away, the feed quality starts to decline. And, you know, that's going to impact on our weaner weights. So as a result, I have to now manage my pastures and keep them vegetative early in the growing season, so that way I can extend the growing curve from April out to June. Because that's when, it's the moment I wean, cow's requirements drop right off, because she doesn't have to do much. And then I can do whatever. The weaner is the most efficient animal that I can have running on my property. And that's probably the biggest thing that I've seen in central Queensland, that everyone, you know, our country's run down in fertility, so we don't produce bullocks anymore, and we struggle to even make feeder steers. So what do? We go and just sell weaners, and that's all right. We don't have to worry about doing any weaning. We just wean them straight on the truck and to the yards. And I'll show you in a sec. Actually scary. We'll go backwards doing so. And so it's about how we can optimise our returns out of that weaner to actually reduce our cost of production. And if we can reduce our cost of production, we've at least got half a chance of actually putting some money in the bank. So everyone will have a different management system to how they manage their system as far as when they carve down. The thing being that for every decision we make, there needs to be another decision of how we plug a gap. Because, invariably, we do it the traditional way, which should be the way, because that's our green day for here is November, based on this. So therefore, that's when we should put our bulls out. That's the traditional North Australian model. But we have these problems as management as a result. So the big thing being that it provides an opportunity, and someone said this to me about, even all year round calving, it takes, it helps lift our calving percentage, and, we have more calves to sell. The problem being that then we're only selling, if we've got a 50 cow herd, we might sell 10 weaners this month, we might sell 10 weaners another couple of months later, and all of a sudden we actually lose economies of scale there, and that's when our cost of production goes up. And we can't control that cost of production because of that. So the easiest way to do this is to really cram home our calving window and optimise our conversion into beef. So we talk about cost of production. It's interesting, I'm a podcast listener from hell. Everything I listen to is in 2 times, so I can listen to twice as many podcasts in a day. But it's interesting, nearly every producer that I ask what their cost of production is, they can never tell me. There's a couple of reasons for that. The first one is that they actually don't even know how many kilos of beef go out their front door each and every year. Yet that is the one thing. If I was a cane farmer, I know how many tonnes of cane go off. I know what my costs, my cropping costs were. I know what my overhead costs are. I know where I'm at. Beef producer, I might just close my eyes, throw a dart at the dartboard, and I hope that I hit somewhere on the board. Otherwise, I'm going to hit the wall. But it was interesting this last night when I was driving up, I was listening to a Southern advisor about cost of production systems in beef systems, and he broke it down pretty simply that in most of their work, 90% of the cost of production sits in fixed operating costs. So no matter if we produce 1 kilo per hectare or 1,000 kilos per hectare, those fixed operating costs around your interest, your rates, your insurance, your utilities, all those are still the same. So as a result, the only thing, we can't really change that. The only thing we can change in the whole equation to reduce our cost of production is to actually lift the number of kilos of beef we produce. And the only way we do that is by looking at our production costs. And, that comes into animal supplementation, fertiliser, you transport, those sorts of things. But it only makes up 10%. But when we look at it, as I say, I scared the bejeebers out of me when I was talking to a person in the room last night on the drive up, and I asked them how much land was for a breeder unit. And then I did some sums and I said, rightio, if I had to borrow them $1 million odd so I could, have 50 hectares, so I could, try to run, if it was me, I'd be trying to run my best part of 60, 70 breeders on that. I looked at it and I've gone at 5% interest, there's 50 grand a year. I've got to pay some principal back off that. I've got to do a few other things just in my operating costs. And I've gone 50 hectares at 200 kilos, that's 10,000 kilos. Oh my goodness, my cost of production was sitting at $7.50 a kilo. Quick way to go backwards. And yes, I can appreciate we have real estate improvements and those sorts of things, but you've got to be able to fund the maintenance of the property and the real estate asset to actually be able to maintain that value. So I started crunching the numbers then, and I said, well, okay, I'm at 200 kilos. What would it get me to get to 400 kilos? And research showed from a trial that I was involved with at Proserpine near on 16 years ago, showed that we were able to, in a grass legume pasture with a bit of phosphorus super every year, we could get 365 kilos to the hectare. And then if we had a bit of urea in a pure pasture, we would get to 600 kilos. So, if I got to 365, all of a sudden my cost of production on that really expensive system now starts to come back to $3.70, which is still, we're losing $1 a kilo on every kilo we sell at that. If I get to 600, well, chances are I'm probably going to go close to getting my number closer to $1.75 to $2. well then I've got half a chance of actually banking some money for the hard work that I do. So really brought home to me that the only way we can make money out of the whole operation, and as far as reducing our cost of production, is to optimise our number of kilos out. And the only way we can do that is by optimising how much feed we harvest. We waste too much feed in this tropical environment. You know, we can grow 20, 30 tonne of feed, no problems at all. Hazard a guess, we probably only harvest maybe 4 or 5 tonne of that. And that is the problem. Remember back to that first slide, what are we? We're harvesters of sunlight, rainfall. So we got to, that one there's the most limiting factor apparently, but yet that's the one that we need to get better at managing. So we hit that, there we go. So we go on, like we can't control the international markets. We can't control what the processor markets are, or even the trade cattle market. Like you look at the weaner market, when there's a drought in the south, what happens? The weaner market crashes because there's no oats for those cattle to go on to. We get flooded, so then everyone panics and then we just see the market dip. You know, but we can control the market that we go into. You know, we see people that go into wags and we see people that go into black cattle. We see people that just stick with straight Brahmins because, you know, it fits their system. But we can control that market. We can ultimately control the kilos out the front gate. And as I said, any increase in that overall just reduces our operational expenses. Now, and we can also control when our cattle go to market by managing our pastures. I remember when I was talking to Kelly about this, it must have been Friday, she was checking in to see how my presentation was going or not going. And, you know, she had the thing about to me about, oh, but if everyone's selling their weaners at the same time, well, the market's going to blip. And, you know, if we look at Queensland as a whole, everyone still has somewhat of a different market trend. And so we're always not selling in the same market. It's about where we sell those cattle to and make sure we can hit them to the right specs. And if we've managed our grass right, we can actually just make sure that, you know, instead of selling them when that market was, you know, if we look at the May, June market where she does always crash because we have all those weaner sales. And if you can hold on and keep cattle going till now, until the storms start to hit over the west, all of a sudden you can instantly pick up an extra 50, 60 cents a kilo by doing that. And so then you look at that, that's where the opportunity presents itself. But you can't do that unless you've managed your pasture back in those early stages. And it's also how we react to market opportunities. I have a quote that the only time we ever make money in agriculture is when some other poor person is at a demise. You know, last year was a prime example where, you know, we saw that weaner market really crash. I had clients that were buying weaners for $1.70 a kilo. He couldn't even produce them for that. And he was buying big framey things. It only cost him $350. But he'd managed his pastures right. He had feed store up his sleeve. We all know what happened to the market. Once it rained, all of a sudden doubled his money. And he said it was the easiest 200 grand he'd made in a very short period of time. He runs 1,000 breeders himself, but he'd bought 500 odd head to take advantage of that opportunity because of how he had managed his system. And he'd started making calls way back early because his pasture condition wasn't that crash hot, but he knew he had feed up his sleeve once it did rain. So, you know, we have to have that mindset of making decisions early, because if we make decisions early, we can take advantage of opportunities. And the other one is we just manage our herd to optimise returns. And, you know, you can't change anything unless you've already measured it. The simplest one is pre-testing. You know, we pre-test, guess what? You can identify if the cow's in calf 21 days post-conception. Imagine that. You can make a decision. Basically, if you had 2 cycles, 42 days, you know, and your breeding season. So 3 months after your bull joining, you can be making a decision on where those cows are. You're not carrying dead wood. All of a sudden, you can then be getting rid of those and taking advantage and bringing in other cattle to make the money instead of having that dead dry cow. But if we don't measure that stuff early, we don't know. But again, a vet's expensive at $5 a head to pre-test. It's only in reality 2-3 days worth of grass that they consume. And So then I peeled it even back further, because we always have this scenario of, what's the cost of getting a calf? And cost to carry, I worked on what I could pay for agistment. And I actually looked at a place 12 months ago, and they actually wanted $10 a week and not $7 a week. But this one here I worked on, well, that's $3.50 an AE if I was looking at AE equivalents. And there's always, when people talk about bull costs, I look at it that when we're looking at buying a bull, well, I want to be buying a bull with some numbers so I could actually know that I'm getting some genetic gain. And so, look at the sales results this year, and so I picked $12,000. And I was looking at a Bossinicus bull, so I said I was going to get 4 years out of him, but I've worked on no resale value for him after that. So he's going to cost me $3,000 a year plus his $1 a day cross carry. So his cost for the year is $3,365, and then we got the $365 for the cow. And when I told my clients this one, they laughed at me because they said, "Who on earth would actually get 80% weaning rate?" And I said, "Well, if you don't put a number there, you're not going to know, and you've got to have something big and hairy to target." So I said, we'll go 80%. So that's 40 weaners on the ground. That cost of that calf is $540 and 38 cents. Or $2.71 a kilo for a 200 kilo weaner. Tony, what's the market? What was the market, say, for a Brahman steer at Serena recently? Yeah. Yeah, so by the time we trucked it there, and by the time we pay yard dues and commissions, we've lost some money. Anyway, we can change that weaner weight quite easily. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then I just looked at it from the breed perspective, and this one here was based on some numbers that I ran with the client, because he decided a couple of years ago, his advisor, stock advisor, said, "Oh, we need to put some black bulls into your Brahman herd so that we can soften them up and we can hit a different market." So those numbers were his. That he only got 2 years out of black bull before they went downwards. So that's $6,000 per year for the black bull, rather than getting his 4 out of his Brahmans. We still went with the same weaning rate, and we still went with the same weaner weight, because again, that was our findings on coastal country, that we still actually got the same weaning weight. And we actually had some more animal health issues because we had to put on more controlled ticks and more fly. So we got to $615.38, $3.08 a kilo. So that's 37 cents difference. So I've got to get better than 37-cent premium at the yards, just even break even on that fella. And the reason I put this here is because I see so many people change their line of sight and go, "I've got to chase the dollar, I get $1.50, 60, 70 cents a kilo from changing breeds." But we never measure the impact of what that happens to our productivity and our efficiencies within our operation, because we've never measured in the first place. So, that's starting to get up there. It doesn't matter when we're at a $5 market, everyone's rosy. But on the current system, we're in a bit of trouble. Then I had there we go, yeah. And so we can fix that. And this is where I was getting back to about, what we do. Do we send that weaner straight to the yards, or then do we make sure we get our pastures right so we can actually add some extra kilos? Because every kilo we put on that weaner after that point, it's not going to cost us $3.08 a kilo to produce. And then all of a sudden, we start bringing down what that value is. And yes, there is a market difference when we sell that animal, because a wiener's always sold for more than what cents per kilo than what a feeder steer is. But we have a bit more control on how we can manage that. But if you haven't measured in the first place, you don't know where you're going to start. So, talk about pasture management, because pasture management ultimately is the only way we can get ahead on this. And now you'll see that wonderful photo there. And this is the prime example of focusing on what you want and not what you don't want. On the left-hand side is 100% rat's tail. How many people in the room have the story in their head that rat's tail's bad and You know, we're consumed by it, we're losing the battle on it, and, you know, when I die, it's still going to be sitting there because I've never made a dent in it. Anyone got those stories in their head? Because I come across plenty of them. I met one bloke once. He had 561 GPS points in on his GPS, and he used to go to that same spot 4 times a year to control the rat's tail. He'd been doing that for 10 years. Guess what? He was still going back because invariably he was focusing on the weed. He wasn't focusing on fixing the ultimate problem, which was his pastures. You know, if we can focus on our pastures, show it time and time again that it's our pastures that will actually manage 95% of our weed problems, because weeds come in because we have white light sitting on the ground, we have bare earth. So we've got a vacancy there, someone's going to fill it. And the vacancy generally comes from the weed. So pasture management. Now, as I said, we can grow so much feed in this environment, but we hardly ever utilise it. And so, you know, I'm a big fan of looking at our pastures and going, well, if I can turn around, and I don't care if I grow 15 tonne of feed, but if I'm only utilising 5, I'd rather be focusing on growing 8 tonne of feed and utilising 6. And I've been doing a trial at home, actually. I've got a place, and it's my family farm. It's been in the family for, since 1885. And it's actually the place where I do everything to fail. And the reason I do it to fail is because that's when I learn. And then that way I don't have to let my clients fail. And so I've got a Leukina trial there, and it's really interesting that I've got Leukina that's this high, I've got Leukina that's this high, and I've got Leukina that's that high. When I put my cattle in there, the one they utilise the most out of is the stuff that's that high. And ultimately, if we look at it, I was actually talking to someone outside before about this, that how we present our feed can actually change our utilisation. And the easiest way to look at this is when you go and look at a feedlot. Feedlots don't have bunks up here. Feedlots have bunks down here. And it's because of how much we can get in each shovel. And so when we have big tall grass, it looks showy and we've got plenty of feed there, but we're actually not going to utilise much of that, because every bite we're actually getting more stem than leaf, and we're putting the rest on the ground. And you know, we'll generally only consume 10 to 15% of the total feed we grow. So as a result, we need to really focus on the feed that we're utilising. Now, this is the real interesting one. Understanding flowering times and triggers. I'm going to use this here. So, now, I got told that men can't multitask, but we'll see how I go. So, most of our grasses we've got in our tropical system. We've got indeterminate grass species and we've got determinate grass species. Indeterminate grass species mean that they'll just go to flower whenever. Usually every 30 to 40 days, they're gone to head. Our determinate ones, they're photoperiod sensitive. Now, we have ones that are long day plants, and then we've got them through to the shortest day. So, you know, if we're in January, we're in December, and we're in June here. Right. Who would know that, will recognise that the humidicola goes to seed in end of January? Because it's a long season plant, or a long day length plant. And the problem with that is that once we get into here, the feed quality drops off because all the sugars drop out of it because it's gone ahead, and then we have troubles getting it back. The really cool thing is that if we can slash it here and get past the we can slash it back down there, get rid of, down to the growing point, get rid of the aerial tillers, we can keep that plant vegetative then for the rest of the year. Imagine that, we can have a grass that doesn't go to head, and we have leaf 11 months of the year. We go to May, that's when bracky goes to seed. Then we've got some short day plants over here, and we've got Soteria sitting between here. Callowed Rhodes grass will be here. This Callowed Rhodes grass is triggered by 12 hours of day length. So from memory that sits around April. And so, again, and then you've got Jerry, I'll talk to you. You go and talk to Jerry. We'll talk about Mekong, and it's in June. And so, all of a sudden, if we've got plants that are flowering at different periods of the year, it actually impacts on where our curve is, our growth curve is. And so, if we've got stuff that, what is it? Yep. Like we've got January, February, March triggering plants, we're not going to be able to utilise that. So we have to, if we're going to optimise our utilisation there, we actually have to have some mechanical intervention. Whereas if we go with some of these fellas, we're still probably going to have to do some mechanical intervention there if we're going to actually be able to extend our feed quality through the other part of the year. Now, the really interesting thing is that who plants a new pasture and lets it go to seed in the first year? Most people do, that I know, because that's what they've been told to do from the 1980s research. The interesting thing is that when we look at water use efficiency, a plant's greatest water use efficiency is when it's in head. Last time I looked, we don't get any feed from about here, there, because that's all stalk. And then the other problem is that we have this big root system on this plant. And then the moment he goes to head, we get those roots drop off. So then he becomes less responsive. He needs rainfall event to kickstart again. Whereas if we can keep a grass, active roots, keeping vegetative, that's when his water use efficiency is at its greatest, and we can turn more kilos of grass out of every mil of rainfall or stored moisture. So by managing our pastures so they don't go to head, we can actually produce more feed for the year, extend our feed quality, and ultimately improve our kilos of beef. Now, wet season management. Yeah, the interload. Who, when we're in the middle of the wet season, when they're mowing the lawn, and you haven't been able to get onto the lawn for a few weeks, and the lawn's gone tall and rank, but you've used them, put the mower in at the same height that you were back in spring, and you end up with these dead patches in it. It's because of the sunlight and the elongating of the internode, and we cut it down past the bottom leaf. Now, it's really simple. You know, the leaf is the solar panels of a grass. He needs that leaf there so he can kickstart again. So the moment we cut it past it, he's got to use his carbohydrate stores in his root system to kickstart again. That can take another 7 to 10 days before he becomes responsive. So if we've set up our plant right, and we've got that leaf there, and we aren't never cutting it below that point there, that plant becomes that responsive to grazing that you'll get leaf emergence rates of anywhere between a new leaf every 4 to 5 days. Now, we had a dairy farmer, he uses Gat and Panic. He's on an 8-day grazing rotation. And that's where he gets his optimum milk production. And the difference, and I get this, that the difference between a dairy farmer and a beef producer is that the decision a dairy farmer makes today, he gets paid for tomorrow in the vat. A beef producer, he makes a decision today, chances are he's not going to see the financial uplift or probably financial impact for another 100, 200 days. So he's forgotten about it because that was only 1% of the decision, whereas at 100% when it was the dairy farmer. But we need to be, if we focus on managing our pastures right, we have a greater chance of actually improving it. So we need to respect that growing point. And it's one of those things, when you plant a new pasture, the best thing anyone can do is in the first 40 days post-establishment is getting a graze over it, or if you can, get a slasher over it. Set that pasture up, sit it down, make it want to tiller out and produce where that leaf is, where your growing point is, and that's going to be your ideal spot for whenever you start grazing again. That comes back to the plant morphology, you know, the grazing numbers, leaves. So most people go work on a rotation that they'll go, oh, we do a 30-day rest, a 40-day rest, or a 90-day rest. As I just said, you know, we can get a rate of response of leaf emergence, you know, 4 or 5 days. Most of our plants are what I'd class as a 5-leaf plant, and before they go reproductive, apart from those fellas that have a day length sensitive, but they still only have 5 leaves. So the thing being that if we want to be keeping one leaf down below so he can respond, and we only want him to be getting to at least 4 leaves, we can be actually on a 15-day rotation or better to actually maximise the amount of water that we're using for the feed that we're growing, and actually we end up probably improving our feed quality even further because of that, because we're creating a plant that is more leafy. And you can't produce beef without leaf. It's as simple as that. The whole thing is about megs of energy, and the only way we get energy is out of leaf. There's a misconception in a lot of people that I remember when I used to sell pasture seed, most common question I'd ever get was, what's the protein content of that grass? Guess what? Protein doesn't matter diddly squat. And I've got the numbers to prove that. It's all about energy. Energy is our limiting factor. That's why there's plenty of molasses sold as a supplementation, because we need energy. But if we can control our leaf, we can manage that. Then we have the nutrition management. Here we go. So, we've already talked about that. Where are we at here? Right, so megs of energy. It is all about the leaf. And I'll show an example where I did a fertiliser trial at a stupid rate of fertiliser. I copped a lot of flack on social media about it from people that have gone to different schools of training when it comes to nutrient management and stock days. But what it showed that we can actually do things. But the eye-opener to me was the sheer fact that even though I thought I was pretty good with having a really high protein feed, my daily performance per animal was all limited, and it was all back to that. So, and that's why, protein's always focused on, but it's only the secondary part. Now, I talked about the bunk height before, and it's about bite depth. Many people wouldn't realise that a beast only has 12 to 15,000 bites per day. And that's no matter if it's a young calf or a cow. The only difference is the wideness of the muzzle, and that's why when I was a young kid learning how to select cattle or select bulls, always had to have the big broad muzzle. When you start thinking about it, it's just a shovel to get food in. And a growing animal, we actually need to be getting 0.8 to 0.9 of a gram of dry matter per bite. And if we're not doing that, we're not getting sufficient daily intake for performance. Which is really interesting when you start looking at the mechanics. And I would say that not many people actually look at it. The only people that ever look at this kind of stuff are the really intense dairy farmers. But we can get more of a bite out of a pasture this high than we can out of a pasture this high, because the beast has got to come from the side rather than coming down. And when you start looking at it yourself, because I tend to go and bite and eat grass and look at these kind of things, if I haven't manipulated my grass right, I get poked in the eye by stems, and then that means I'm not going to eat it either. Phosphorus. I'll put up a chart. And now phosphorus is a double whammy one. We've got it in the soil. We don't have enough phosphorus in the soil. Most of our soils in Northern Australia will sit between 5 and 10 milligrams per kilogram. Most of our introduced pasture species, they need 35 milligrams per kilogram to be effective. And I'll put up some data that was done with rat's tail, and it showed that, ironically, once we improved phosphorus levels in the soil, rat's tail didn't become a problem because our pasture was more responsive. And then the bigger thing with that is we fertilise with phosphorus. Our tropical grasses will only ever give up 0.2% phosphorus per kilo of dry matter. So instantly, if we don't have any additional phosphorus in our system, we're actually still capping out what our ultimate weight gain potential is. And so we need to be mindful of that where we're at. Phosphorus also very important for breeders, as far as milk production, as far as weaner weight. And as I was talking about, go back to that weaner scenario. If we fed $1 a week's worth of phosphorus to those cows all year, because last time I looked, generally we have green feed up here. If we manage our pasture right for 52 weeks of the year, when do we have to feed phosphorus? When we got green feed. So if we spend another $50, I would challenge you that weaner would weigh an extra 50 kilos. And yes, I spent $50. But if I add $50 onto that weight, I've probably reduced that cost of production by another probably 20 cents. So then all of a sudden I start to actually maybe in the money. Percentage of intake. So interesting, you talk to people and go, cattle eat 2 to 3% of their body weight. If anyone's ever done a nutrition edge course, you'd understand that no chance in billy-o that they'll do that. And particularly in our tropical pastures have one really bad thing about them. It's called fibre. And it takes 12 hours to break down the rumen in most of our grasses. So therefore, the time that it takes to refill that vat is severely limited. So when I do my budgets as what my potential production is, I find that my daily intake only sits around 1.8 to 2.2%, even in my best managed pastures, and nowhere near the 3%. And it's interesting, once you start coming off those numbers, what your impact on daily weight gain is. Other one, percentage moisture. And this was a really interesting one. You know, when we're in the middle of the wet season, our grasses are full of water. And I had this guy he rang me on the 4th of January. He'd got over his New Year's hangover, and he's got an Optiway in his paddock, so he knows what his cattle are doing because he treats his cattle like the share market. You know, if we're not looking at the numbers, we don't know how to make a decision. So he goes, I've got 500 head running around, and we're doing 0.7 of a kilo a day. He said, what am I missing? You know, the grass was green, it was fantastic. And I said, first and foremost, yes, you've got phosphorus, but I said, I would suggest that if we put a little bit of phosphorus out first and foremost, we'll get an uplift. But I said the really interesting thing was that I'd prepared for the season not to break back in December, and I had 30 tonne of barley straw sitting in my paddock. Ironically, my grass was as green as anything, and my cows were hammering the barley straw. So I said, we probably need some roughage there just to help balance things out. And he goes, right. Ironically, when it's wet, no one buys hay, do they? So hay farmers were giving the stuff away nearly. Instead of paying $400 a tonne, he was able to get stuff delivered for $250 a tonne. So we put it out. He rang me 4 weeks later and he goes, you know what? We just picked up another 0.3 of a kilo a day by doing what we've done in our rotation. And so we looked at that. You know, there was 500 head. It was actually, and the market at that point for those weaners was $3. So he was picking up 90 cents a day, and he'd worked out it was costing him 10 cents a day to do so. So there's 80 cents just for thinking a little bit laterally about what his limiting factors were at that point in time. And, you know, we were putting the hay out where there was areas where there was weeds and those sorts of things, so we could actually do some difference to the country. And lo and behold, we've seen a change in how this whole system works. And it was just by plugging those little gaps when we needed to. We talked about fibre, non-digestible fibre. You know, it's really interesting. Everyone gets excited when they see a cow pat and it's got a bit of, it's got that bit of structure to it. You know, whole thing being, if we've got a 450 kilo steer and we want to be going ahead, we probably want him to be doing 10 kilos dry matter intake a day. In the ideal world, we only want 3 kilos of that going out the rear end. We don't want 5, you know, so we've got to manage our pastures so we can get rid of that non-digestible fibre, and that non-digestible fibre comes from the stem, and stem mainly. So again, that's why we want to be focusing on leaf production rather than anything else. The class of animal comes big into it. You know, when we have big tall, the easy analogy I have, the smaller the animal, the shorter the grass. We got weaners, we only want grass this tall. You got a tall grass, well, you're only going to put breeders in there, and the breeders are going to go in there for one thing and one thing only, and that's going to be your bulldozer to knock it down because it's cheaper than going slashing. But there's no point in putting weaners into big, tall, rank grass because guess what? They're not going to do because there's not enough energy there for them. They're not going to be able to consume it, and you would have been better off slashing and then putting the cattle back in there, and you'd pick up your kilos pretty easily, even if costing you $50 a hectare for slashing. But when we don't know, if we haven't measured that type of stuff, we won't actually pick it up. Body temperature, I talked about that where, you know, when in the middle of summer, it's bloody hot, humid, and if we're digesting fibre, all of a sudden our intake will drop as well because these cattle are going to peak in temperature because of breaking down that fibre. And then if we're trying to get the bulls to serve cows at that point, or we're trying to get cows to go and calf, our production is actually going to drop. And again, we don't see that because we're only measuring, every 100, 150 days, whereas we see it in the dairy system every day of the week. We see cows drop 3, 4 litres just on a humid day. And as a result, that's why we change our rations in the middle of summer and actually use cereals winter cereals instead of corn silage in that period so we can drop the body temperature out. Same happens in cattle. And the same happens, I was sitting on a committee and we're looking at doing an animal welfare project. And it was really interesting how everyone got in and said, it's all about, dehorning, pain relief, all those sorts of things are where our welfare issues were. And this was aimed at Northern Australia, and one of the blokes actually said, what our biggest animal welfare issue is the colour of the cattle that we're putting in the north. And if we look at that, and this applies to all livestock, a black animal will attract more insects, a black animal attracts more heat, a black animal therefore is under more stress than any other colour animal. So, when we look at that body temperature factor, that's a big thing. And again, that impact may only be for 90, 100 days until it cools off. But if we're 0.2 or 0.3 of a kilo off during that period of time, well, that adds up to, 30 kilos of beef that's impacted. They might catch that up. But we need to be mindful of that and how we manage it. Body condition score, age-old thing that you want that cow. You don't want her over-fat when she goes to the bull. But at the same time, she's not going to go in calf if she's skin and bone either. Everyone talks about how Brahmins, they're great. They don't go on calf if the season doesn't allow it. Well, we shouldn't allow that anyway because we want to get a calf every 12 months. So we've actually got to manage our body condition score. And that does come back to that phosphorus scenario again, and also any energy. So no matter what your calving date is from that rainfall factor, you have to be mindful of what that body conditions, what your ultimate body condition score is going to be at that point of joining. But if you don't have an idea of that, you're going to be making rash decisions too late in the season. Molasses always runs out. I can't get this, I can't get that. Guess what? You can if you make decisions early. Trace minerals, we're on the coast. Selenium, copper, cobalt, all those factors play a role. They're only minute amounts, and that's why you can buy it just in a needle these days. But you see the impact, well-known bullock producing area just north of Rockhampton, floodplain country. Copper deficiency is a known thing. Treat with copper, all of a sudden they pick up an extra 3% in dressing percentage. They don't measure it anywhere else apart from the uplift in the dressing percentage. But what's an extra 3% worth on that carcass? Oh, struth. What time are we supposed to go, Kel? Oh, that's all right. Now, interestingly, what are we? 2024. This theory was come up in 1873, and it still hasn't changed. And, no matter if this is the soil, we can put all the nitrogen in, we can have all the other elements there, but if we don't have, say, for instance, phosphorus, guess what? Our production is limited at where that phosphorus level is. And it's really interesting that that's where we see a lot of issues further south and over the range when it comes to Indian cooch. Everyone reckons buffle's a really good grass, and it is, but buffle requires the same amount of phosphorus as what a 1 tonne to the acre wheat crop does. And when they were over the range and they couldn't grow a 1 tonne to the acre wheat crop, what they're going to do? They went and plant a buffle. So we're on a pretty poor base to start with. But when we look at this from, even an animal point of view, we can have all the megs of energy there, we can have the protein there, but if I don't have the phosphorus and I'm at 0.2% dry matter, and I ideally, if I'm at an adult equivalent, that's at 7, for maintenance and maintenance alone, it's 7 milligrams of phosphorus, or 7 grams of phosphorus per day. But if I want to be doing a kilo of live weight gain a day, I need 22 grams. So, if I've got 0.2, guess what? I'm getting 10 kilos in, I'm only at 20 grams. So I'm actually still 2 grams short to hit my number. And I go, everyone will blame. I've had it time and time again. They blame the pasture when we're not doing our kilo a day. Well, A, the cattle probably may not have had the genetic potential to do it, but we didn't fill the other gaps. We had everything else right, and that was still a limiting factor. So we need to be mindful of what those limiting factors are, and those three are probably the big factors. You know, energy, protein, and phosphorus. Now, that work? Okay, so we won't worry about the volume, but what I wanted to show here, so this is a trial I did at home. That last front that come through, when was it, August? You know, we were lucky enough we had 191 mil out of that. This is 21 days after. Over that side at present, that was no fertiliser. And now this has got a pretty good history. This is only not even 12 months old, this paddock. It's had 4 grazings already. Here is where I fertilise at 250 kilos to the hectare of urea. When I do things, I only do it for big hits. I should have actually only put on 100 kilos, but I wanted to show the rate of response. You can see there that basically there was 5 times the amount of feed from that same rainfall event. Phosphorus was already looked after, and ironically, for the 4 years prior to that, this paddock was a pure legume stand. And so it should have had plenty of nitrogen there. But basically, when we looked at it from that rainfall, and I would only suggest that I probably, the first day I got 12.5 mil. So that washed the urea in. Next, that following 12 hours, I think I had 63 mil. And then the following 12 hours, or 18 hours, I had like 100 and something mil. And the 100 mil, I don't reckon I got much of that actually in. But what it did show is that rainfall isn't our limiting factor when it comes to production. You know, in that instant there, the only limiting factor was nitrogen. And now, we put the sums up. So, 21 days post-rain, 635 kilos on the non-fertilised stuff. You know, so, you know, and there was 7.6 megs energy. Everyone would get excited because there's 12.12% protein in that. The NDF was 64.4. When I ran it through my modelling and based on the number of kilos of feed on offer, I could run half a beast to the hectare, and my potential gain on that beast was 0.6 of a kilo a day. And based on the feed, I had 30 days for that half an animal. Versus the fertilised stuff, you know, 2.2 tonnes, so we'd end up just under 4 times the amount. Megs of energy was 9.65, protein was 17%. That's where I should have only put on, if I only put on 100 kilos, I would have still had the energy, I probably would have still got the growth response, but I wouldn't have had that surplus nitrogen and that surplus protein. And so that protein is actually going to be wasted and it'll get cycled back into the paddock, which is okay because it's not going to go anywhere because it's a closed system. But from an efficiency point of view, it goes to show that, you know, you don't go over the top either. But I want to see how long this response lasts for, because for most producers, you can only get a fertiliser truck once a year. You know, it costs you the same amount to go over the country to put on 100 kilos as it does for 250. So for me, apart from the actual additional cost, so for me is about, let's see what that gain's going to be. But the big thing was 4 AE per hectare, and based on the megajoules of energy and megajoules of energy alone, because protein didn't really matter, I had the potential of 1 kilo a day. So, you know, if we looked at that, and based on the 4 AEs, there's still 30 days of feed on offer. So if I looked at that alone, that's 120 kilos of beef produced per hectare in that 30-day period versus 15. So what's that? That's nearly 11, 12 times the difference. But the big thing being there is that, like, you would never go and do this kind of thing to your whole place, because fertiliser is only expensive when you don't utilise the feed that you grow. When I come back to that calving window scenario and where we should calve, where we can change things, this is where we can use that. That, you know, I remember, I always like looking back through research, because we had some bloody good research done in the 70s and 80s. And for some reason it didn't get taken up. And I only just realised just recently is because the cost of land and the cost of cattle was so low at that point versus what the cost of doing that operation was. Whereas now we look at it, you know, we're paying $20,000 a hectare for some country, and we've got cattle that are worth, you know, $1,500. So those numbers have changed now as a percentage. And, you had a very good researcher here in Mackay of the name of John Hughes. And I remember, the old thing was phosphorus, be it either single super or DAP in the spring, coming into late summer, early autumn, hit it with urea to change your feed quality at the other end. And you look at what we could do there, depending on how we were managing our system. That would be if we were in a cow-calf system where we were calving in that September period. All of a sudden, if we got feed quality in May, June, July, all of a sudden we can keep our weaners a bit longer. We can go and do 4 kilos per hectare per day and get those weaners through, so we're not selling them at the exact same time as every other person. So what can that mean to us as far as an uplift? And that did cost me $250 a hectare to do that job. I see urea prices dropped a bit now, but my alternative when I did this was that if I didn't fertilise, I would have been staring down the barrel of having to actually buy hay. And to go and buy hay, I'm paying $400 a tonne. So for me, $250 gamble to produce a little bit of extra feed, it was worthwhile. And we only need, a forecast of 12 to 20 mil to actually get a response from a strategic nitrogen application. But you have to have it in the shed to take advantage of that. So you have to have some prior planning. And you only do it on your paddocks that have the potential to give you that growth response. You don't go and put it on your worst country. Your worst country you probably need to be doing other things with. And you don't go and put it on your best country because your best country is already performing at its best. It's about looking at where I can use it to bring another paddock up to a better performance. Now, we talked about phosphorus. And this is a really interesting one. So this was a trial, MLA-funded project done at UQ back 12 years ago. So ironic that phosphorus is one of my bugbears. I see that we've done, I think there's 20 odd projects and research projects around phosphorus in the north, and there's still requirements for more because no one believes that it'll happen worry about it on their place instead of doing it. Now we look at this, so 0.9%, I talked about that 7 grams per day for maintenance. We see there over a 150-day period, we go from 275 kilos to 310 kilos. So it is just maintenance over 150 days. That's a fair bit. If we're paying $1 a day adjustment, or if we're on a younger animal, we're probably, 50 cents a day. It's actually to get, 35 kilos. Not much money in that. Versus we get 0.24% phosphorus. So that there is, that's better than just having good quality grass that we can digest it all. It's actually about having a bit of phosphorus available to them. Phosphorus is, if you use DCP or some of those, doesn't matter if it rains on it. There's no urea in it, so there's no issues of poisoning. And the cattle will eat it if they want it, and they won't when they don't want to eat it. But we see there, 150 days, we're at 425. So what's that, an extra 150 kilos? So, kilo a day. Wowza, on the same feed. And, it's interesting, there's a lot of people that throw sticks about, yearling mating and those sorts of things. Like the replacement heifers are the most expensive animals in the herd, apparently, because you've got to carry them for 2 years before you're basically carrying them for 2 years, 9 months before you actually get a chance of getting a return out of them. We actually changed the system for a client where at weaning, we reverse engineered it, and we've gone, he weans in May. We want to be able to join for him. His green date from memory is October. So we actually work out what our daily weight gain needs to be from the point of weaning to the joining weight, which we're going to be we want them at 350 kilos. And then we also then work out where we want to be for the mature cow weight. So we know what we've got to actually gain during that period. Ironically, this bloke ended up having to kick his bullocks out of his bullock paddock so he could put his heifers in there, and because normally heifers go into the back paddock, and he's put his bullocks into his next paddock down. We've now made it that he can get, he has his starting weight, so when he weans up front, anything under his starting weight gets kicked out because we work on the interpretation that those heavier weaners at the start were often probably the early calves anyway. So therefore they're out of females that are already going to be better breeders. So one tick. Then if they weren't, they've obviously got some pretty good growth rate about them. So again, that's the type of animal we want. Then we go, rightio, invest. I think he worked out that he spends it was close to $2.50 a week on phosphorus. He paid for that. He paid for his calves up front because otherwise there's a cost to carry, and he then picks up 70-odd% rejoin weight on the first calf heifers. And his thing wasn't he only runs 300-odd breeders, and he said, well, adding phosphorus to his system allowed him to put his 3 boys through boarding school. That's the financial impact that he had by doing it. But if he hadn't have peeled back the system and looked at how he can fine-tune and look at what targets he needed to be, we couldn't have worked out what our daily gains needed to be, and the easiest way was to do it with phosphorus. And again, he manages his pastures so it's never he always has green leaf. So, you know, if you don't have green leaf, well, you don't need phosphorus because you need urea, you need other proteins. But if you manage your pastures right, and when you have a higher legume content in your pastures, your phosphorus consumption will go up. And that's all because the sheer fact that we've lifted feed quality, so therefore the phosphorus, in order to maintain or optimise our daily weight gain, it needs to go higher as well. And as I've talked about, you can't improve what you haven't measured, and no matter what it is, be it preg test rates, be it daily growth rates of your grass, even what your percentage of, say, rat's tail is to normal pastures. Yeah, if you haven't measured any of that, you don't know. Like I always remember, I've controlled a lot of rat's tail over my time, and probably over the past 15 years, I've probably changed my tune how to attack it. But it's always interesting, you go to a job, and the bloke turns around and goes, that job didn't work. And you go, all right. And you pull out your phone and you look at the photo of the paddock before we treated it, and it'd be wall-to-wall rat's tail, and you go, well, there was 10,000 plants per hectare or better there. You look at it and you go, hang on, there's a plant here and a plant over there. And we're going, well, if we hadn't measured, yeah, you'd call it a failure, but we actually go, we've reduced the population from 10,000 to 1,000. That's 90%. That's a win. That's a win in my books. Because but if we hadn't looked at that, we would have just said it didn't work. But it's because we have to measure things so we understand where we're at. So we roll into rat's tail, and this guy here is probably, I've worked with this guy for near on 10 years, and I sacked him as a client in the first 6 months because he was too bombastic. I blocked his phone number, and I said, if you're not prepared to listen to how we're going to change the system, no point in me working with you. Still today, we now work together because he rang up and talked to my boss and apologised, and he said, how can we overcome this? But he was all focused about controlling rat's tail. We've spent on this place alone, he had spent in a 20-year period, he'd spent close to $1 million on trying to control it. And he was losing the battle. The thing that changed him was that in the 2019 when we had the drought, he spent 150 grand on feeding molasses for no real gain, just to keep his cows alive. And he realised that he needs to change his focus and focus on the pastures, because the pastures were what were going to change his dial rather than worry about controlling the weed. So, this country here, real estate value-wise, with rat's tail in it, it's worth $1,500 an acre. This country without rat's tail, real estate value is worth $3,000 an acre. So, this paddock here, there was 80 hectares. He used to be able to run 20 bulls. That's where he used to keep his bulls before joining, and he still used to have to feed supplement. So he went into a project last year where he spent $1,100 a hectare. So it was at $440 an acre. So we now up to a $1,940 investment into that land. As of there, in September, that was last week. Yes, there is rat's tail. The rat's tail makes up about 5% of the population. 95% is pasture. And that was planted in January, I think it was January 4 or 5. And in that 80 hectares, I think he's had 365 grazing days per hectare out of it already. But what he's realised now is that where he gets his control is by focusing on his grazing management, and getting mulch on the ground. What do we do when we get mulch on the ground? We get better moisture infiltration, so therefore we get to take advantage of rainfall better. That mulch layer also, when we look at, I mentioned earlier about weeds, they come to fill a vacancy. Not many people realise the easiest way to control rat's tail is by stopping white light hitting the soil. DAF did lab trials many years ago, but they didn't really publish the data because they didn't think anyone would be really interested in it. Seed under white light, it was an 85% germline seed. It was a pretty good germ of rat's tail, actually. Under the white light, after 21 days, there was 85% germ. Under a period of 12 hours of green light and 12 hours of black light, replicating night, that germ of that same seed lot was 25%. Oh, right, that's good. That's a 60% reduction just by looking at light alone. The other interesting thing about rat's tail, there's only two grasses that I reckon have the weakest seedlings known to mankind. And they're both probably the most robust grasses I've ever come across. One is rat's tail and one is gamba grass. Both seedlings are bloody weak. So when we have competition and mulch, those seedlings struggle to get fruit. So this guy's strategy now is that, because he's now in a major pasture improvement program, he's realised that he can go and put on urea instead of going and spending, what's flupropanate now? It's $50 a litre or something. So we're $100 a hectare for liquid plus application. We're probably getting close to $150, $160, and then we've got all the management problems that are associated with that. And then because we've got to destock it then for 3 months because that's the withholding period. We're going to put $150 worth of urea on that instead. We'll change the dial. Anything that we don't utilise, firstly we'll improve the utilisation of the grass. But anything we don't utilise will go back on the ground to create that mulch layer for us again. And we'll see that there actually will change our population. And it's no different to most of our weeds. Most of our weeds only come there when they're in bare spots. And you'll see it, why does lantana grow under fence lines? Because there's no grass growing under it. The birds sit there and pooped out the seed, apparently. It's because there's bare soil, and lantana's the best one I've ever seen for creating a scab on the earth. You look at the plant structure of it, it is the Band-Aid. Repairs the soil from that's been run down. So, remember when I went to uni? A weed is just a plant that's growing out of place. Guinea grasses are classified as a weed because we're in cane growing country. If we're in a pasture system, guinea grass is fantastic. And as I said, in a perennial pasture system, weeds are considered to be feed. I consider them to be feedback to our grazing management rather than anything else. It's about the whole health of our system. Best one I've ever seen with that, which is actually a pasture plant, which was Wincassia. A lot of people hate Wincassia. To me, it's the best indicator. If I see a paddock that's got Wincassia all through it, I can nearly determine what that person's grazing management is without even asking a question. Because of its tannins, cattle will preferentially graze it. All of a sudden, we know that they've eaten the grass. So, let me guess, you graze heavily during the in the wet season. You don't give it any spelling. That's why we are basically taking out the grass and letting the Wincassia dominate. So it's no different to most of our species. And we need to ask why these weeds are here in the first place. Are they here to bring up nutrients? A weed will generally, the soil is healthier and smarter than what we are. And there's millions of seeds in that profile. The soil biota will actually trigger what it needs in some instances. So if we do have weeds coming into the system, we actually should be wondering why. But, I used to think that, we need to, the weeds are only a problem if we're limiting our moisture. If moisture is not limiting, we're not reducing our production, as long as they're not going to kill our stock, maybe we should take them on board a little bit first before we want to go and reach for some chemical that we're going to impact our whole system. So That's why I'm the biggest fan of mulches known to mankind, because, we change that line of sight, get rid of that weed, get our pastures going, we can overcome it. And then if we really want to be very good at our grazing management, we use wick wipers, because then you use cattle to eat what they want to eat, and you go and wick wipe what they don't. And then you can control anything. I was talking to a client the other day, he's controlling his, we'd moved to using it for rat's tail, now he's using it for his suckers, because he's just changed his line of sight and focusing on the grass, high impact, utilise what the cattle want to eat, let's just wipe out the rest. All of a sudden we're creating the pasture system that we want, not what the environment's allowing it. So you can see there that you can see that mulch on that ground. That's only, as I say, that's, what is it? We were January, so we're 9 months in, and we've started creating a mulch layer. From a moisture infiltration point of view, fantastic. From a seed suppression point of view, fantastic. But we made sure that, 42 days after that pasture was planted, we grazed it, so we could make the plant sit down. And so we could start to encourage it. But we need to get some more nitrogen onto that so we can actually get that bugger going laterally, and we can fill in the gaps. But now, I thought I'd touch on this, because this is one of my bugbears about rat's tail work. We have always used chemical. And I actually helped with these trials that John Reeve did from Biosecurity Queensland. And it was around how looking at our pastures and looking at phosphorus and fertiliser, how it can change our production system. And anyone that's been to a biofield, it's pretty mongrel country. It's Wallam country, very low production potential, lots of rainfall. Yep, I reckon I'm going to be right. So we and it had all weedy sprobolus in it. And they did do one treatment. I remember sitting on the back of the ute with the little 12-volt spreader chucking out granules. But then, we've talking with John, we worked out that the soils were only probably sitting at 5 milligrams per kilograms of phosphorus. And we've got humidicola, it's not real responsive. What can we do to change it? All the old research said, we need more. So they basically, we went and did fertilised and unfertilised system. Now, the interesting thing, unfertilised produced, for the year, produced 2.66 tonne of feed versus the fertilised, which was 4.456. The interesting thing was the percentage of humidicola versus rat's tail or weedy sprobolus in those samples. 6.5% weedy sprobolus in the unfertilised versus 2.8. And it's all because of the fertiliser, and the humidicola made up 93%. So just by using that nutrition, we changed what the dynamics of that pasture was. And if we have a healthy, palatable pasture species, well, all of a sudden we see that flow-on effect as far as carrying capacity, production capacity goes. And we've already learnt the requirement for phosphorus in our system as far as weight gain potential goes, that focusing on that added little benefit, how it will change what else. And that was only after, that was 3 years, that was work after 12 months. They got it down to under 1%. And, you don't have to worry about them chasing a weed and spending money on chemical. And it was the best thing that I had for clients in the past couple of years was when we couldn't get flupropionate for rat's tail or weedy sprobolus management, because we actually had to change what we did. And it's been the greatest learning we've ever had. So, the research has been done on all this stuff. We need to focus back on what actually drives us, makes us money, and it's our grass. We are grass producers. Without grass, we can't produce anything. So we need to change our focus, how we can grow better feed, and it'll get us there. The weeds, their ultimate success in a long-term pasture system is having a highly productive and well-managed pasture. Manage the pasture plants to remain actively in green for the whole year. Anyone that's chasing carbon projects, you can only get soil carbon sequestration if you've got a green leaf 365 days a year. The plant stops photosynthesising, roots shut down, all of a sudden when it rains we burn up the carbon. So you have to manage your pasture to keep leafy all year round. You want to ensure that there's adequate nutrition. Soil testing regularly. What's the recatchments requirements? Is 2 years around soil testing and applications. But if you don't measure, you can't change anything. And you've got to minimise the bare earth potential, that white light factor. It's often caused by overgrazing, overuse of herbicide. You know, you go and kill one plant, guess what comes back there the next year? That same plant. So, you know, if we're going to use herbicide, use it at the right rates. And create mulch layers. You know, that's our friend. Reduces soil temperature, increases moisture infiltration, we get a better response. All right, we're going to wrap up. That's about right. You know, fellas, let's round them up. Yeah, it looks like 97, so we've got 100. Yeah, that's how we operate. So, critically use cattle numbers to utilise grow and feed at peak growing periods. Low-cost production systems are only possible when the kilos of beef are optimised. Otherwise, a low-cost production system with low kilos is, guess what, a high-cost production system. Critical numbers to know, the animal production system, and your profit and loss. Every small, like I'm a small business owner, I look at my P&L every freaking 2 weeks. When I ask producers when they last looked at their P&L, oh, that's the accountant's job. Well, if you don't know that, we can't work out where our numbers really are. You know, control your limiting factors, soil nutrition, animal health. You know, we talked about lepto, we talk about pesty, we talk about bull testing, we talk about even the impact of 3-day, and worms, fluke, all those things affect our production. And the pasture utilisation. Ensure we have green leaf, get rid of stem, it's not our friend. And big factor, manage what you can control and focus on what you want, not what you don't want and what you can't control. You walk away with that one message and that one message alone, I've done my job for the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ross. That was wonderful.